girls evolving or growing into people pleaser because of the inner child issues or the childhood traumas or the way they have been brought up. And you have worked with a lot of women out there. So can you share some of your experiences with which you have helped women evolve and face the bridge the gaps or face the challenges in their relationships and professional life?
So, I had a client who was a significant conflict avoider.
Okay.
So she often let her husband make all the decisions, even when she disagreed, simply because she wanted to avoid conflicts. So during our discussions, she shared a pivotal moment from her childhood when she was 7. Her parents had a violent argument which involved screaming and physical abuse. So she and her younger brother were hysterical in that moment. She was recalling all this. Okay, she recalled biting on a shoe for comfort. So this experience left her with a deep-seated fear of conflict, causing her to freeze and shut down whenever faced with potential disagreements. So as a result of that, she would often choose to avoid conflicts altogether, right?
Yep.
Or if somebody is a people pleaser. So most of us are people pleasers,
Yes.
and we get validation, approval, attention, and love by pleasing others. So that again is a very common with my clients. They all are people pleasers. And then we really need to work on their beliefs, how they were formed, and we need to rewrite a new story for them, so that it empowers them. It helps them to find their worth. It helps them to stand up, speak up. And that's how their relationships get better.
Apurva, I have seen a lot of individuals in both all the genders I have dealt with throughout my life of whatever, I have lived so far. And I have come across certain people where individuals who want the benefits of, something that they want or desire, but they're not ready to take the accountability or accept the consequences of their actions. Is this some rooted trauma or thing that needs work for them, like you talked about somebody avoiding conflicts altogether? So does this sort of behavior also has some seeds rooted somewhere in some trauma form, and that's the reflection of things happening?
Yes, absolutely. Like the example I shared, my client's trauma really came from that incident in her childhood.
Okay.
And she was literally frozen in time. So whenever there was a conflict, she used to freeze because it reminded her of that conflict her parents were having, and the mask that we wear to really save our inner child, you know is to just avoid it. No, like, the mask, the ego, we call it the ego. That is the false self. The false self says, no, 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 like, just avoid it, move away from here, don't have that conversation, it'll make you feel vulnerable. So this is one of the survival strategies, coping mechanisms to avoid conflicts altogether, to really save. So the ego, the false self, is really there to the ego loves the inner child, okay, and wants to save the inner child. It does not want the inner child to be in pain. So the ego really says, okay, okay, like, you don't cry, you don't yell, just relax, just avoid that situation, just move away from there, or just distract yourself. And there are a lot of other survival strategies that we can talk about.
I will come back to that question, Apurva, and just a follow up on this. um you know I have seen a lot of families where either of the parents, it could be a mother, it could be a father, sadly in most of the cases it's the mother, um you know often not moving out of a toxic marriage. And usually the response we get is, I'm not moving out because of the child we have. I have two questions to this. One is, how does this particular decision of hers or his uh, impacting their own healing journey? Because somewhere or the other, they have to work on their self as well. And at the same time, how is it getting stored as a trauma in the child for which they are not taking that decision?
So I've understood your second question. What's your first question?
So my first question is, like, the parents, either it could be a mother or a father, they also have to go through a healing journey. And by taking a decision of not moving out of that toxic relationship, how that whole decision or is impacting their own healing journey.
Okay. So if they do decide to heal, which is beautiful, I know a lot of people who do not want to change. Like they are always blaming the other person. And it's very easy to blame. But very few people actually want to work on themselves. So if they decide to work on themselves, on their marriage, go to a marriage counselor, or just work on themselves individually, it can really, really help them to save their marriage. Again, there are, of course, different reasons for everyone. If
Yep.
there is physical abuse, then yes, it's important then to address it right away, or maybe get out of that marriage. But for the other problems, yes, it needs to be worked on, definitely, because the child is seeing all of that, and that is becoming traumatic for the child. This child may be so scared of getting into relationships later on, getting into intimate relationships, because he has seen what this marriage is. So for him, it will be very casual. He will not want to really open up in an intimate relationship, just because of the fear that what if the same thing happens to me? So it's just better to kind of be detached and just keep it casual. This is just one of the outcomes.
You were talking about the survival strategies just before I asked this question. Can you elaborate a bit more on the survival strategies and share some of the, survival or coping mechanisms people have relied on with some examples or stories, if possible?
Right. So survival strategies or coping mechanisms are really, in terms of the inner child, the coping mechanisms are created so that the inner child does not feel the pain. Okay. So they are developed in response to a challenging or a traumatic experience, often formed during childhood. Okay, so we just want to survive in that difficult situation. So that's why we cope with a strategy. We pick a strategy to help us survive and navigate that difficult situation, but it can become maladaptive in adulthood. And so I'll give you examples of a few survival strategies.
Mhm.
One of them is avoidance, and a conflict avoider is something I already mentioned before. Right? So, if a child experiences trauma or conflict, they might learn to avoid situations that trigger those memories. And that leads to a pattern of emotional suppression in adulthood. Right? Now, another survival strategy is people pleasing. Again, very common, because we prioritize others' needs and feelings over our own needs and feelings. Why? To gain approval, love, appreciation, and avoid conflict. So
Mhm.
again, goes back to that 4-year old who wanted that love from his mother. So he changed himself. He became a people pleaser. He cleaned the room to get that attention. He was not getting it this way, so he got it that way. Through the he was coping with it, and he survived through becoming a people pleaser. Then there's control. There's a strong need to control situations or people to avoid any feelings of helplessness. So in a chaotic or unpredictable home environment, where there are frequent conflicts, substance abuse, or inconsistent parenting, a child may feel helpless and anxious. So to cope with it, they might take on responsibilities that are beyond their age, such as mediating disputes between parents or caring for younger siblings. So this gives them a sense of agency in an unstable situation. Or if a child observes that certain behaviors lead to chaos or conflict, they may create their own set of rules or routines to avoid triggering these situations. For example, they might decide to keep the house exceptionally clean or follow strict routines to minimize the risk of upsetting their parents, thus attempting to maintain peace and
Hmm.
order in the house, you know. Or a child might distance themselves emotionally or avoid expressing needs. And that's how the child is controlling how others perceive them, because the child is really protecting himself from any potential hurt, right?
Yep.
So this is one of the survival strategies, and I can go on and on and on. I can talk about perfection. There are so many.
If you can share two or three more, for our listeners to help them understand some of the most common ones.
Right. Again, perfection is a very common one, you know. So we really want to be perfect. We set excessively high standards for us to avoid criticism and gain approval, right?
Yep.
Because we were criticized in childhood, we were told we were not good enough, or maybe the parent wanted the child to be a high achiever, and the child gets used to being a high achiever and doing things the right way to please the parent, and in that the child becomes a perfectionist, and then it's very difficult to let go of it later in adulthood. And then there's addictions, which numbs the pain, and the addiction can be anything. It need not just be drugs or alcohol. I had a client who was addicted to shopping, online shopping. So, and this is what she realized when I was telling her about all the survival strategies. She said, I have this addiction because whenever she felt anxious, the first thing she would do is just go on her phone and start shopping, start buying things. And then when the things came, she really didn't need them. So she used to send it back. So her first thing was, because she couldn't take a fight or anything else that was painful for her, her survival strategy was, okay, just leave this and go to the phone and order something. And that made her feel good. Or even emotional eating. People do a lot of emotional eating to comfort them.
I was going to come on that. Emotional eating is my go-to coping mechanism. Though my bills for Zomato and Swiggy have reduced over the last few months, yes, I can relate to that. For me, anytime I'm anxious, I'm stressed out, or I want to avoid any situation, I might have just had lunch. You will find me ordering something, roll or something. Now, what I started doing was earlier I used to order everything junk, burger,
Hmm.
momos, anything that was available, and that was probably high in, salt. And I used to feel a little calm after that. But slowly and steadily, as my digestive system started going for a toss, I started gaining a lot of weight. Recently, I took notice of it. I would not say that I have been able to get over it 100%. I still do it at times. The few changes I have been able to make after realizing it is one, now I try to order something that's the healthier alternative.
That's great.
So earlier, if I was ordering burger or sandwiches, probably now I would go for a Subway. I know it's not also 100% healthy, but
Right,
it's comparatively healthier.
right, right.
Or something I have been not able to do probably 2 out of 6 or 7 times. I would just open Zomato, scroll through till the point I don't find that anxiety or feeling subsiding. And the moment that subsides, I close the application and get back to my work.
Mhm.
So that's where I've been able to reduce those number of orders. But I have myself, felt that emotional eating or stress eating as one of the major coping mechanism for my own self.
Major, major for so many of us. So for my client, she told me that whenever she was upset, that is when she was a child, Her mom used to tell her, okay, okay, don't be upset, come eat. I'll make this for you, I'll make that for you. And she would feed her. So, so whenever she was upset, she was fed. Okay, so she relates it to that. And so her body is coded for that. Okay, so whenever she's upset now, she goes to eat something. It's so natural.
Yep, yep. And for me, it is to a point where I'm very specific about my food and certain delicacies that I relish. And if they're not made to that particular point, either I will reorder it, or if I don't get it the way I want it, my anxiety would again go to the next level, or I
Mm-hmm.
feel more sad. That's something I'm working on right now. That's one part I have to work on. Like lemonade is something I really wanted in a particular consistency, or that particular mixture should be made in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
My friends often ask me why are you getting that lemonade changed thrice or four times even.
I know a lot of people in my life who do that.
Yep, yep. So for that, sandwiches are something I want to be the bread to be, toasted to that particular temperature only. It should not be too high or too low.
Right.
Again, I'm very particular about my food. I
So,
want
so maybe, you can ask a few questions that where is this coming from? So in childhood, how was food discussed at home? When you sat on the table for lunch or dinner, what was the talk all about? These are the questions you can ask yourself, and you'll get some answers.
I will do that exercise. Purva, this brings me to another question that identifying the need for going for inner child healing or identifying these triggers or patterns in our own self is one thing, but until and unless we don't act upon it, it's not going to be helping us.
Correct.
So how can someone really trot that path? Because I know a lot of people, friends of mine, for them, alcohol is one of their coping mechanisms. And whenever we sit together, they relate it all back to their childhood or the, fights they've had with their parents or the quarrels they've had with their siblings. And
Hmm.
they're often like, I just want my mind to feel calm, and that's where I'm drinking. Or
Correct.
that's I am, relying on this particular mechanism. Probably once or twice in a month, as per me, is good enough. But if somebody is going for everyday drinking, that gets a little disturbing and threatening for their life as well. How can somebody who has realized that, okay, that alcohol is not good for me, but they are not able to take action steps on that, maybe they would go for 1 or 2 days to to gym or something, but they're back to drinking, and then because they're drinking overnight every day, they're not able to get up in the morning, and they're not able to follow that routine.
Right, right. So, to really help them be consistent, they have to always do the inner work in some form or the other. Like, keep listening to a podcast that inspires them, that will help them to be on their journey, or read books that will again help them to be consistent on this path, or then work with a professional or therapist or coach to really help them to not bounce back to who they were. So it's always about doing something that will help them to stay on this new path that they want to walk on.